All right, so thanks very much. So the thing that got us all going was the opportunity to do something serious about greenhouse gases. And of course, greenhouse gas is a very big problem, as I'll explain. But as we've been working along, what we quickly learned is if we're going to do something in synthetic biology, we need some really serious tools to work with, and AI/ML came along to offer those to us. Now, all of you would be familiar, of course, with the great announcement of DeepSeek, I'm sure, the last couple of weeks, and how it seemed to overwhelm much of nature, or much of the banking system and everybody around the world. Actually, to me, it wasn't actually quite as surprising, because in fact, what I'm going to talk to you about is in many ways doing exactly what I think they did, which is let's take advantage of what's out there. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's try to do things so that it's less complicated and a lot more simple. And guess what? You get great value out of that. So that's where we come from. And now backing up to why that's so important for greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are about biology. That's about Mother Nature. But biology is a very complicated language. DNA, the computing language of organisms, is highly complex. And so it's been very difficult to work with. Even though we had synthetic biology tools, it meant that it was still very much a trial and error game. So let's put some context here. Why did we come about? Well, man-made GHG emissions across the world now are in the order of 50 billion tons of what's called CO2 equivalent a year. We all know that that's accumulating in the atmosphere. It's leading to all kinds of unfortunate effects, all driven by the massive rise in population primarily, because as human organisms, we need all these organic things that we find in food and materials, chemicals, energy, and on, because that's how we survive. And that worked okay when we were maybe 1 billion people in the world, but now we're 8 billion people. As was mentioned, I actually graduated from this university. And when I graduated, I then followed it up with some postgraduate work in environmental engineering. And it's interesting how the world has changed, because when I took environmental engineering, you might be amazed to hear that the solutions that were put forward were taller stacks, more dilution, all the things that we kind of have overwhelmed, because we would assume in those days that nature would look after it. But with 8 billion people, it's not happening. We did, however, become convinced that that biology, since it was the source of the problem, was probably also the source of the solution. And if we could only enhance Mother Nature so that she would do the things that she does more quickly, more productively, with smaller footprints, then we could make a major significant impact on the world of greenhouse gases. Yeah.
This is man-made emissions, 50 billion. I'm guessing you did not add there the, for example, forest fires. That's not man-made, but that's also
There's
greenhouse
huge
gas.
emissions of greenhouse gas, and that we'll come to that though. We'll come to that.
I'm curious to know how much of that is actually consumed by the plants and the ocean. Because the ocean is also capturing. So how much of these 50 billion is left over that we have to deal with?
Well, the 50 billion is the abnormal part, right? That's what we've kind of added in. It's not the natural occurring thing, but we'll come to that in a moment.
Thank you.
Now, the key point is that although biology would appear on the surface to be the answer, as I say, because of the constraints and the et cetera that it confronts, it doesn't evolve quickly. It uses these massive oceans, forests, herds of animals, plants in order to try to do its job, as we will explain in a moment. And that doesn't happen quickly. So we're kind of overwhelming the system. That's why we have the problems. So most people have come to believe, I think, that biology will be the source of the answer, but it will require help. And as Nature, an article in Nature stated in 2023, genetic engineering, which really means accelerated evolution, together with AI, will speed the effort and likely be the most effective way forward. Now, it's interesting, that's the path that we were on. And we're on that path because as people see biology becoming more and more important, and I would say again, because prior to the Industrial Revolution, it was the way we did things. The speculation is that it's going to be a very large contribution to the world economy. McKinsey suggests it'll be sort of $2 to $4 trillion by 2030, 2040, that kind of area. You know, that's a significant part of global GDP. And they also note, though, if you look at the bottom there, that 60% of the world's physical inputs conceivably could be from essentially made biologically. So it's obviously a good place to look. Now, when you look at biology, biology is kind of an integrated process. It, you know, things go back and forth. Inputs of one thing or outputs are taken from outputs of other things. And essentially, it's the perfect example of a circular economy. So what we see when we start to look at the commercial world, we see it crosses industrial sectors, it crosses technology sectors. It's a very integrated and synergistic type of approach. Now, when we were looking or speaking, just to answer your question again, essentially nature responds to what's going on in the world. And over billions of years created an environment that was more or less in balance. And it developed pathways that would take in CO2 from gases like methane, or it would take in CO2 and other gases to create these forests and plants and so on. And then we in the animal world would use those things, and then we would expel things, and the environment would pick those up through bacteria and reconvert them, and it would go round and round and round. And what's interesting is almost any organic molecule is made by some organism somewhere in the world. Now, this is an interesting picture that really comes to grips with the question that was asked earlier. This is what the carbon cycle is all about. And you can see here, you know, this is turned upside down. The atmosphere is on the bottom, but it was just because of the way it's being presented. Now, what's interesting about this picture is, A, it really sets it out beautifully and very simply. But what's even more important in my mind is this was drawn almost 100 years ago. And so people were obviously thinking about interconnections, or some people were anyway, about how it all works. And if you look here, you'll see there's plant life and animal life. There's different things that are emerging. There's gases and different molecules are being created. They're flowing back and forth, and they're pulling on particular minerals out of the Earth's other sources. All a very nice integrated and synergistic process. Okay, so that in essence is what we're trying to mimic. As I mentioned, the response to the question, the problem with this process is they're all massive footprints. They're low productivity. They are, unless you put them all together. But about 25 years ago, people began to do things to understand DNA, genetic sequences, the program that actually manages life more completely. And that led to something called synthetic biology, which is there are ways that you can essentially cut and paste this long program called DNA. I can take pieces out, I can add pieces in, I can make it do different things. And so it means I can basically not quite play God, but I can help Mother Nature along. And that's a very powerful example. So over here on the left, you can see the sort of thought process that we go into. And on the right, we have these genetic scissors, if you like, that we can kind of play with to manipulate the organisms. So that allows us to build things. We can make just about anything, things like fuels and food and fertilizers and all sorts of things out of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxides, etc. So why aren't we doing it? Well, theoretically, it's possible. And we decided we would put together a process for doing that. So we try to identify some big problems in the world that we can solve that are essentially greenhouse gas related, and go to work, figure out what biotechnology application could work, etc. So once we've got a problem, the trick is, can we design a solution to the problem? And we think that historically was very difficult because you had to do it in a laboratory. It was all trial and error. But what if we can digitize this process? What if we can transform it from working in labs with dozens or hundreds of people and working in labs where each iteration takes us maybe days or weeks or months, work in a lab where we can try things out very quickly, multiple times, then that would change the game. But again, it comes back, it's a data problem, okay? This is a data problem. So if I think about a small bacteria and its genetic sequence, it has about 3 million to 6 million base pairs in it, it's called. Okay, so think of that as code lines in your code. We as human beings have about 3 billion. So you can imagine trying to look not only at a single one, but now at across hundreds or thousands of them to try to develop and find sources of solutions that can be used productively. Very difficult problem for the human being. And so it's taken lots of time and effort. So he said, well, what about if we simplify this process by building tools that will eliminate many of those problems? And so starting about 4 years ago, we began to work on what we call this maximizer portal. The idea was that we would automate data collection, so we'd be able to search the world for sequence information. We would be able to annotate it and quality control it automatically. We would use AI-powered tools to understand and decode, if you like, the code that nature is running. We create a place where people could collaborate and interact and ask each other questions and build on things and so on. And so we built this with a team mostly of co-op students. And with that in place, said, okay, now we've got the data we need. Now let's start building models to actually work with all of that information. So we produce things like shown here that are what are called genome scale metabolic models, known as GEMS for short. Some of you may know that teams from the University of Alberta actually do very well in global competitions in this space and have for many years. But these things are very powerful, but they're also very complicated. So again, going back to my little storyline about, for example, a simple bacteria. One we are working with today has about 1,500 pathways within it that carry out various chemical and other functions for the organism, all governed by the DNA. The DNA is telling it what to do when it experiences particular situations. With these models, though, we can now start figuring out what are the flow rates through each of these various parts of different pathways. With that understanding, we can now start to make potential changes, try out options within here, but do it on a computer set and do it over the weekend. We can handle hundreds of organisms almost simultaneously. And so we're now busy, in a sense, it's like playing a video game with biology, pardon me. So with the GEMs and with all these other things, suddenly we've got a piece that sits in the middle of what heretofore has been a disconnected play to some degree. So on the one hand, we've had the DNA sequencing labs, we've had all these wonderful researchers working away in universities and so on. We've created things called biofoundries that allow you to run lots of experiments in parallel, but are still very expensive. And then on the other side, we have the companies that are trying to get them into the market and take ideas that can actually solve problems and do it commercially. And so this tool that we put in the middle allows that to happen. We call it, a data portal, a virtual R&D lab, a synthetic biology collaboratory. It makes life simple. And why is it necessary? Well, here, for example, is what a protein looks like when you get information. On the right, all these are amino acids that are inside the protein that you're trying to sort out. Each of these amino acids does something specific and triggers a particular event. So what we're looking at within these models is the DNA that sends a signal to create what's called RNA, which then goes out and generates enzymes and proteins. But we have to understand how it reacts and when it reacts, because what we're looking for, of course, is a particular molecule that might be produced somewhere within this whole process that is valuable and that we can make out of something that typically otherwise is considered to be waste. So why is AI and ML so important? Well, because it's allowed us to play the game essentially on a desktop computer instead of in these labs. We're doing classification work at the present time with machine learning on proteins and into a little over 400 classes. And we've been able now to reach the point where we can correctly predict, on average, about 70% of the responses, which is quite remarkable from a trial and error problem to a place where we go in where we've got a 2 out of 3 chance of being right when we actually do it. Our desktop computers were sitting right there. We actually lend them out occasionally here on campus to people who are in the queue for high-powered computing in other places. But in general, it's really quite amazing. So we've taken the old sort of super cray computer type stuff, put it into a small box. We've now got the ability to reach out into the world for all the data we need. We've got these fancy tools that we can visualize and do all sorts of things with, and collectively really change the game. So our particular application was what we're calling ActiveX, which is a molecule that we can make out of greenhouse gases that is almost perfectly suited for jet fuel. And when we think that jet fuel is responsible for 3.5% of the world's global greenhouse gas impacts, that's a pretty good place to go if we can pull that off. Now, the challenge is you have to do it with high productivity because it's a commodity, so it's very price sensitive. You have to be able to do it with high productivity, low energy inputs, all the things that are very different from much of what we read about and hear about in, say, the pharmaceutical world, where they're very high-priced outputs. They can not worry too much about cost or other aspects. They only have to worry about efficacy, right? Whereas this really pushes the process to its extreme limit in terms of being valuable. So we're, yeah.
Biology.
Question here.
You said you do trial and error, and that didn't take a long time. It costs a lot of money and all that stuff. But synthetic biology can also create something that is not realistic, not true. Do you verify it in? So is it a way of limiting the trials?
Yeah.
Or is it you bypass the trial and errors completely? I mean, you just do it synthetically.
Yeah, well, I'll give you, that's just where I'm going and was about to say, actually.
Sorry.
Is that So we went off with this target molecule. We played around with all our lovely tools. We went into the lab with a design. The design worked on the first try, which blew us away. It took us to a space which, you know, you can see some of the percentage numbers here, but about 95% faster and cheaper than previously trying to do something similar. So we looked at things that were going on that were similar. It had taken in the order of $100 million, 10 or 20 years, 500 to 1,000 person years of effort. And suddenly we've done it in 18 months with half a dozen people and less than $1 million, right? It's just changing the game. And that's why I say it's, in a way, it's an analogy to the DeepSeek approach to the machine learning and large language models. So it gives us this high level of confidence, right? So that we're de-risking it because we blow out the things that clearly aren't going to work off the models. You're constantly learning, so your models are constantly being improved. But the ultimate is, it now is taking it from something that's maybe a risk in the high 90s to a risk that's in maybe 2 to 5. And in our case, turned out to be 0. But but that's, we're not expecting that on an ongoing basis, obviously.
Obviously would work.
Yeah. So yeah, let me repeat the question. So the idea is to root out things that won't work and focus on things that are likely to be commercially successful, is the essence of your question. Yeah, what we've done is we've translated this problem from a discovery problem to an engineering problem. So if we look at an issue, somebody has a waste, whether it's greenhouse gas or anything else, that they want to get rid of. Okay? So that's a starting point. So that's their problem, is they want to get rid of that. What's a biological solution to do it? So we will then begin to think our way through, all right, what can we do with that kind of an input? What, you know, should we go shoot for food, or should we amino acid? Should we shoot for jet fuel? Should we shoot for, you know, a cosmetic additive? What do you want, basically? And you try to marry those two up between what you want to get out, what's the molecule you need to get out versus what you're starting with. These tools allow us then to design something that would make it work, presumably, and ferret out all the dead ends, as you were saying earlier. And then basically what we've done is, it's a bit like saying, I've given you a box of tools. Do you want to build a house? Do you want to build a barn? Do you want to build a race car? You know, but here's the tool set. You build what it is. And that's a really beautiful thing, because you can do it very cost effectively. And as I say, removing much of the trial and error and greatly de-risking the problem.
Finish your sentence, sorry. Finish your sentence, sorry.
Sorry?
Finish your sentence. Interrupt your sentence.
Finish my sentence?
Yeah, sorry. I think you're right. I was interrupted. My question is, you talk about, one thing you could do is say, here is a chemical process I want to produce. There's a factory that does it. You're not building a factory, you're building an organism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the organism is the factory. It depends what you're trying to solve. It could be a bacteria, but and I think mostly for industrial processes, it's going to be. Yeah, so you modify what it does. You know, you put new pathways into it. You take pathways out of it. You try to make it focus on what you want it to focus on, so it, you know, has enough so it can survive, and so it will produce what you want. And then you build your process accordingly based on that. In the case of what we're doing with jet fuel, we've done a really beautiful thing, because we don't even have to separate it. This particular stuff, the organism expels. So it simplifies even that process, right? This is a modified organism. It's an engineered organism. Yeah. And you know, it's about problem definition now. So the whole goal is problem definition. And if you can define your problem well, you've got a toolkit to probably make a solution that will work. Now, some won't. Okay, there are some things that relate to productivity. This whole thing is about economics too, when you're starting to get into the marketplace. But you can also digitize those processes. So you build techno-economic models that give you the kind of productivity requirements you need so that you're actually designing organisms that will do what you want them to do, that they have to do to be successful. So basically what all of this does is it kind of enables the bioindustrial revolution. It says, I now am limited only by my ability to identify the right problem in the proper way. And if we do that, and we do it by essentially reducing the time, cost, and risk accordingly, so that everything is now in the high 90s of likely success, before you actually go into the high cost parts of the game, then you're really in a position to change the game. And that, I think, is going to be the foundation for true circular economy in the world. And that's kind of where we're going. Mm-hmm. Speak up. Mm-hmm.
I don't want to interrupt, but I don't know if you're going to talk about it again. I had a question about safety. So these tools allow you to create or modify an organism for a particular purpose. So you have something in mind, and in your simulator, it's called a simulator, you can synthetically do it. Again, you're focusing on your target. But then the day you create it in reality and you release it, well, how harmful can that be to other organisms, and how does it interact with existing organisms to do something that you didn't foresee?
So there's
can we do that also in the synthetic simulator?
So there's two issues here. And so I'm going to split it into two. The first one is that at the end of the day, you know, there's I'll say a certain level of concern about what are commonly referred to as genetically modified organisms. Okay? There's, oh, is this going to do something terrible? So depends on what you're doing. Some processes are very contained. And so they're all done within contained vessels. They're not being released in the environment. Those are the easy ones. So if I'm going to do, as I described, say, make jet fuel, then I'm going to do that in contained processes. It's a naturally occurring molecule, so that's not a problem. It's already, you know, if you walked around this neighborhood, you'd be exposed to it. The only difference is we're making lots more of it. The genetically modified organism is contained, so you don't release it. The only thing you end up with dead biomass. So you may want to do something with that, but it's not that's not the big problem. Now, if I go to an environmental problem like cleaning up an oil spill, and I want to release things, then it's a little bit different. There, though, you can do things in genetics that effectively make it very susceptible to other environmental conditions, in which case it'll die. So you could, you know, create organisms that won't live in the normal environment, that they need to be in these bad environments in order to survive. So you can do some of that. But, you know, but obviously you've got to be careful.
Has to be part of the design.
It's got to be part of the thought process. Absolutely. Yes.
In the same vein, so you started with a problem that needs to be solved for the good of the world, the hydrocarbon emissions. And then you said, okay, we can also get a saleable product out of this. But aren't there going to be other people who approach this by saying, well, I don't really care about the environment or solving a problem. I just want to get the saleable product, right? Like, is that not a difference?
Well, people are people, aren't they? And I would say that in as we know, for example, some people have played around with human beings. That in some parts, other parts of the world, they wouldn't be allowed, and even there where it did occur, it was kind of turned off fairly quickly. But so, you know, I can't tell you about anything we do can be used for good or bad. right? I could use this thing to hit someone on the head. But the trick is what you've got to hope you have and work towards is this is where your collective values have to come to play. So you create the right kind of environmental regulatory systems and that kind of thing. Because if you don't, yeah, people will do bad things. They all do it all the time. So that's really the story. The story and what I really want to leave with people is the fact that with artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can do an awful lot. But one of the things that some of the learnings that we've had through this process, we were talking about before this sort of convened, is the importance of good curated data. So if we just took in data from anybody anywhere in the world, and there's plenty of sequence data around the world, it's of varying quality. It's structured in different ways. It uses different terminology. It is all set up so that the big challenge when you're starting is you also have to make sure you have good data. And that requires proper quality control and curation efforts. And it doesn't matter whether you're using it for biology or anything else. If you're going to use AI and ML, you have to do that. The other thing you have to remember is that as you build models, models reflect bias, and bias gets built into them in various ways. So one of the things that you want to be sure you understand, if at all possible anyway, is the kind of biases that are built in. Because if I've been working in a particular area and I have a particular mindset, I may do things that somebody else won't. But if they assume that you've done it in the same way they would think, you may get totally different answers. And in fact, they could be destructive answers. They could lead in places that you don't want to go. So you have to be very careful with your data. And the third thing we found, and it comes back again to kind of the ethic and values set, is if you're going to solve problems, and I would say it doesn't matter whether they're greenhouse gas problems or any other problem, the value set of the team is very important as well. And when you're actually building teams to do this kind of work, I would say one of the really key things is to try to generate a team in which openness and the ability to challenge one another and the ability to say, I don't understand, can you help me? All of these kind of things become very important because the real value still is in the people in the collaboration. The tools don't do it all. They'll help, but they are not the whole story. And that's where I would like to stop and take any questions you might have.